Blake stood center stage. A smug, sinister grin stretched across his face, eyes glinting like a wolf locking onto its prey. Today, you'll witness the son of a famous singer make an absolute fool of himself. The words sliced through the air like a knife, landing square in Marcus's chest. Laughter erupted from the crowd, loud, cruel, relentless. It came in waves, crashing down with no mercy. No one held back. They looked at each other with smug, knowing eyes, as if the outcome had already been decided. The air grew heavier by the second. Tension gripped the auditorium like a vice. Marcus Calloway, 16, stood alone on stage beneath the harsh spotlight. The light was cold, merciless. It bore down on him like a silent interrogation, stripping him of every shred of hope, of dignity. The brightness wasn't illuminating. It was punishing. It pierced his eyes, forcing him to face the jeers, the smirks, the quiet malice all around him. There was no escaping the stares, no shielding himself from the mocking smiles, the kind that fed off humiliation. They were all waiting for a disaster, a public humiliation, and each laugh felt like a blade, cutting deeper into Marcus's chest. The room wasn't just an auditorium. It was a portrait of class division, painted in cruel precision. Westmore Academy, an elite private school, was a sanctuary for the wealthy, the connected, the untouchable. Luxury cars lined the parking lot. Designer clothes strutted through marble hallways. Weekend galas, yacht parties. It was all just normal here. And in the middle of it all stood Marcus, a black boy from Oakland, a social experiment, an outsider. The school's diversity scholarship kid, the only one. From the moment he stepped through those gates, Marcus became the punchline. No one cared about his grades, his talent, his mind. All they saw was a boy from the wrong side of town, the son of Victoria Calloway, the R&B icon. That alone made him a pawn in their twisted social game. Under the icy glare of the spotlight, Marcus could feel the isolation in his bones. He was surrounded by people, yet completely alone. The looks he got weren't curious. They were sharp, cold, judgmental, like he didn't belong. And maybe, in their world, he didn't. He didn't want to be Victoria's son. He didn't want to be a legacy or a symbol. He just wanted to be Marcus. But at this moment, no one saw him. All they saw was her son. The weight of despair pressed down hard. But Marcus had no choice. He had to face this moment. He had to stand there, while every fiber in his body screamed to run. He clenched his fists, silent, burning. He made himself a promise. One day, they would see him for who he truly was. Not for the name he carried, but for the fire he built. And today, he would survive this. Blake, the golden boy of Westmore Academy, son of a wealthy family, poster child of privilege, and the kind of student everyone either admired or feared. With flashy sports cars, designer sneakers, and a weekend party for every mood, Blake thrived on attention. But there was one thing he couldn't stand: the mere existence of Marcus Calloway. To Blake, Marcus wasn't a classmate. He was a game, a way to prove he could control people, bend them, break them, humiliate them. With his pack of loyal followers, Blake crafted a plan. They forged Marcus's signature and submitted his name to the school's talent show lineup. The goal? Public humiliation. Blake wanted to prove that even the son of a famous singer had nothing special to offer. And just to make sure, he arranged for a few accidents to ruin the performance. For Blake and his crew, tearing Marcus down wasn't a joke. It was a power move, a way to reinforce their place at the top. No one at Westmore ever saw Marcus for who he really was. They didn't see effort, or intelligence, or heart. They only saw a scholarship kid from Oakland, the son of Victoria Calloway. You must have talent. Your mom's a diva, right? Why don't you sing backup for her or something? The comments were always there. Casual, smug, underhanded. Not loud, but heavy. A constant barrier between Marcus and the rest of the world. They weren't just jokes. They were microaggressions, thinly veiled racism, classist barbs hiding behind grins and mock praise. At Westmore, a school built to glorify wealth and legacy, Marcus was never truly in. No matter how hard he worked, how many A's he earned, how many essays he poured himself into, he was still just Victoria Calloway's kid. That's all they let him be. Every school day was a quiet war, a battle against invisible shame, against the weight of assumptions. Marcus felt the shadow of his mother's fame pressing in from every side. People didn't look at him. They looked through him, as if he were just a pale reflection of a superstar's spotlight. You really look like your mom. She must be so proud of you, even if you haven't done anything yet. Soft words, hard cuts, even when all he wanted was to be recognized for his value, his own voice. It all turned into a punchline. The stares, the whispers, the fake smiles. Every interaction was just another reminder that Marcus didn't belong. He wasn't a student to them. He was a headline, a novelty, a name they could twist for their own amusement. And it hurt. Not just once, over and over, until it carved a shell around him, a shell made of shame and injustice and quiet rage. Marcus didn't want to be reduced to a nameplate. He didn't want to be flattened into a title that erased his humanity. But society, this school, these people, kept trying to force him into that mold, and he had to claw his way out of it, every single day. In his darkest moments, Marcus fantasized about walking away, leaving it all behind. But deep down, he knew. There was only one way out. He had to rise, break the silence, shatter the labels, and prove, on his own terms, that he was more than the son of a singer. He was Marcus Calloway, and he would not be defined by anyone else's narrative. Marcus stepped onto the stage. His feet felt like they were bolted to the floor, every step heavy with a weight words couldn't describe. When he finally stopped under the spotlight, the cold light wrapped around him like a force determined to expose everything he'd ever tried to hide. The crowd's mocking eyes cut into him like razors, sharp, precise, relentless. Snickers echoed across the auditorium, each one tearing at the fragile pieces of Marcus's heart. The laughter didn't stop. It reverberated like a cruel song, and Marcus stood right at the center of its chorus. A sense of defeat rose in his chest. Every whisper, every sneer made him feel like a puppet being dragged across a stage of humiliation. No one saw him. No one recognized what he had fought through just to stand here. The spotlight had become a cage, an invisible iron box forcing him to face what he had spent years avoiding. And now, every eye was on him, not as an audience, but as a jury. Only this wasn't a courtroom of justice. It was an execution of dignity. Waves of shame crashed inside him, one after another. But instead of collapsing under the tide, Marcus chose to face it. He looked straight into the light, not away from it, even though it tried to devour him whole. His vision blurred, not with fear, but with something else. Power. He saw it, for the first time. Not in their eyes, but in himself. He stopped looking at the smug faces, stopped hearing the cruel laughter. Somewhere deep in his chest, a flicker of fire caught spark, a fire he never knew he had. Marcus drew in a deep breath. Air filled his lungs like armor, calm before the storm. The laughter was still there. Blake's chuckles rang out like victory bells. But Marcus had made a choice. He wasn't running. He wasn't shrinking. He was done being ashamed. With a calm he didn't even know he had, Marcus opened his mouth. His voice was low, steady, unshakable. "I'm going to sing one of my mother's songs." Gasps, whispers, a sudden hush, just for a moment. But Marcus didn't speak those words to impress. He spoke them to reclaim, to push back. This wasn't just a song. It was a declaration, a strike against the mockery, against the racism, against the box they tried to trap him in. The song he chose had never been released, one of Victoria Calloway's unreleased pieces. But to Marcus, it didn't just belong to her. It belonged to him. Because it wasn't about fame or stage lights. It was about invisible roots, the kind that grow deep underground, the ones nobody sees, but hold up the whole damn tree. This song was about the pain no one ever saw, the silent struggle, the unseen fight. And today, Marcus would bring it into the light. He stood there, still surrounded by laughter, still under judgment. But now, he was standing on his own terms. He opened his mouth and began to sing. The story of Marcus Calloway had just begun. As the first notes soared from Marcus's lips, soft yet full of soul, the crowd remained unrelenting. The snickers didn't fade. The smug looks didn't soften. The air was thick with mockery, and Marcus stood in the middle of it like a flame trying to survive the storm. But what they didn't know, Marcus was ready for more than their ridicule. The moment his voice found its rhythm, Blake and his crew made their move. They'd planned this. They hacked into the sound system, injecting a stream of harsh, distorted noise into the speakers. A buzz of static, pitchy interference, shrieking feedback. His voice twisted out of sync. The beat slipped, and with every garbled sound, the crowd howled louder. Phones came out. Cameras flashed. Marcus was about to become a meme, a punchline, again. But he didn't stop. He didn't scream. He didn't run off stage. He didn't break. He bent the chaos to his will. Something clicked inside him. Marcus shifted his tone, slowed his pace, molded his voice to rise into his melody, turned the sabotage into rhythm. He made the interference part of the art. What was supposed to break him became the reason they couldn't look away. He adapted. He owned it. He created something no one had ever heard before. Raw, imperfect, alive. Mockery turned to stillness. The laughter stopped. Phones lowered, eyes widened. People who expected him to choke now watched in silence. Something deeper was happening. They weren't hearing Victoria Calloway's son. They were hearing Marcus. A few heads turned. A few students exchanged glances, nodding. They got it, finally. Then came the first clap, light, tentative. Another joined, then another, and like wildfire, applause filled the room. But Marcus wasn't singing for that. He kept going, calm, composed, powerful. Each word no longer a plea to be heard, but a declaration. I'm not here because of my mother. I'm here because of me. And when he finished, silence, just for a breath. A full second where the whole auditorium seemed to freeze. Then, thunder. Applause roared, real, stunned, respectful. The judgmental stares were gone. In their place, awe. Even the ones who filmed him for laughs kept filming, this time for reverence. The shift in the room was undeniable. Marcus had flipped the script. He wasn't their project anymore. He wasn't their pity story. He was their moment. He had won. Not because he was born talented, but because he refused to back down. Because in the face of sabotage, humiliation, and a sea of expectations trying to drown him, he created something beautiful. Marcus didn't just sing. He rewrote who he was. The moment Marcus finished his performance, no one could have predicted what would happen next. What was meant to be a humiliation became a turning point that would change his life forever. The video of his performance, once expected to be a laughingstock, spread like wildfire across social media. At first, people hit record just to capture his failure, a public embarrassment to be shared, mocked, and forgotten. But what they captured was something no one expected. Marcus's voice, his resilience, his raw transformation of chaos into art. It was all there, and the world watched it unfold. Instead of ridicule, the video drew awe, respect, silence. Students who once laughed now paused the video, re-watched it. Some stared at their screens in disbelief. The very people who pressed record to shame him were now sharing the clip with captions like, "This is real talent. This kid turned sabotage into a masterpiece." In the auditorium and far beyond, the atmosphere began to shift. Marcus was no longer seen as Victoria Calloway's son. He was a force, a creator, a fighter. Praise replaced cruelty. Comments flooded in. "This is what a real star looks like." Marcus Calloway is the name you'll remember. He didn't just survive, he transcended. Even Blake's own circle began to waver. The same people who backed him in every cruel scheme now had to reckon with the truth. They were wrong. And the truth only grew louder. Footage surfaced, angles that clearly showed Blake and his friends tampering with the sound system. It was all caught on camera. Their sabotage, their smug expressions, their downfall. What was meant to destroy Marcus ended up exposing the rot, the envy, the prejudice, the abuse of privilege. The clip didn't just highlight Marcus's voice. It revealed the system trying to silence it. Blake and his crew were no longer envied. They were disgraced, stripped of the illusion of power they'd clung to, and the student body saw them for what they were. Bullies, hiding behind family names and social status. And then came a voice the world did know, Victoria Calloway, watching everything unfold, every second of pain, every cruel smirk, every forced smile her son endured. She couldn't stay silent. A music icon, a single mother, a woman of resilience, she took to social media. "I'm proud of my son. He is not just my child. He is his own person. Talented, brave, powerful, and those who tried to humiliate him will now have to face the truth." Suddenly, Victoria was no longer just a Grammy-winning singer. She became something even stronger, a mother who refused to let the world define her son. But Marcus, even with tears in his eyes, didn't lean into that shield. He turned to his mother and said, "Mom, thank you. But this fight, it's mine. I need to own it." There was steel in his voice, not defiance, but identity. He'd spent his whole life living under a name too heavy to carry. Now he was choosing to rise from underneath it, on his own terms. "I don't want to be Victoria Calloway's son. I want to be Marcus Calloway, an artist, a creator, not because of her legacy, but because of mine." This wasn't just about one performance. It wasn't just about a song. It was a war for recognition, for dignity, for the right to be seen, not as someone's shadow, but as a light of his own, because the world gave him space, and Marcus had won, but because he carved it himself. Once the truth behind Blake and his friends' sabotage was exposed, there was no denying it anymore. This had never been just a joke. The evidence was overwhelming. Video footage, text messages, even recorded conversations. It all pointed to one thing. Blake and his crew had deliberately sabotaged Marcus's performance. Out of envy, out of spite, out of a quiet, insidious form of racism they never thought would be called out. But now, Westmore Academy couldn't look away. A school that prided itself on excellence and creativity was forced to confront a bitter reality. Racism had been hiding in its own halls all along. The policies that once turned a blind eye were no longer enough. What happened to Marcus became a catalyst for change. New protocols were introduced, mandatory diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops for all staff and students. Hard conversations began. Old systems were challenged. Westmore wasn't just forced to react, it was forced to evolve. And for Blake, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. He didn't just lose the respect of his peers. He lost everything he thought would always be his. His full-ride scholarship, gone. His spotless record, tarnished. His future at the prestigious university he'd been guaranteed, slipping through his fingers. Blake had always played the game of privilege. But this time, the rules had changed. He became the cautionary tale, not just for what he did, but for believing he could get away with it. And Marcus transformed, no longer the charity case, no longer living in someone's shadow, no longer the quiet, polite kid, too afraid to raise his voice. He stood tall, not because others gave him permission, but because he earned it. He became an artist, a symbol, a man forged in fire. His persistence, once ignored and mocked, had finally been seen for what it was: bravery. When he released his debut album, Invisible Roots, the world didn't just hear a collection of songs. They heard his story. It wasn't just commercially successful. It was deeply human, layered with pain, beauty, defiance, an echo of everything Marcus had survived and transformed into art. He was no longer Victoria Calloway's son. He was Marcus Calloway, an artist, a fighter, a role model for anyone who'd ever been silenced, doubted, or pushed aside. He proved that sometimes the greatest power comes not from privilege, but from persistence. Soon, the world began to follow. Major stages, TV shows, international tours. And wherever Marcus went, he didn't just perform, he inspired. To every kid who ever felt invisible, to every voice that had been drowned out, Marcus became the reminder that they weren't alone, that their dreams still mattered, that dignity could be reclaimed. Because Marcus didn't just overcome, he elevated. His journey wasn't about revenge, it was about recognition. It was about rewriting the narrative for kids like him, kids told they were less when they were so much more. And in doing so, he didn't just change his own life. He changed the story for all of us. After everything he had endured, Marcus stood on the stage of his own life. Not to be applauded, not to be admired, but to deliver a message far greater than any standing ovation. Never let anyone define you. The long days at Westmore Academy, where he was mocked, dismissed, and labeled just the singer's son, had become mere shadows of the trials he survived. Battles of spirit, wars fought in silence, and won not through fame or status, but through grit, through fire. Marcus's story wasn't just about music. It was a journey of self-definition, a battle not just against others, but against the weight of assumptions and the violence of low expectations. He learned that perseverance and self-belief are the sharpest blades to cut through any cage. He was not a byproduct of fame, not a footnote to someone else's story. He was Marcus Calloway, resilient, original, unstoppable. In a recent interview, Marcus shared a single quote that has since echoed through communities, classrooms, and hearts everywhere. When you know your worth, no one can define you. No one can diminish you. You are the only one who gets to decide who you are. These weren't just words. They were truth, earned, lived, and fought for. Marcus became that truth. He lived it on every stage, in every note, in every choice, to stand tall when the world tried to shrink him. He showed us that when life reduces us to labels, to stereotypes, to shadows of who we truly are, we have the power to rewrite the narrative. Marcus's victory wasn't just musical, it was human. He found power in his voice and used it to crush the walls around him, to carve out a path that was wholly his own. And through that, he taught us the most powerful lesson of all. When you realize your worth, nothing, no prejudice, no label, no storm. Marcus's story is not just one of justice or perseverance. It's a reminder that no matter what the world tries to name you, resilience and self-belief will always lead you where you're meant to be. Marcus didn't just win in music. He won in life, and he proved, once and for all, that it's not where you come from that defines you, but what you choose to rise into. 1 year later, Marcus returned to Westmore Academy, but this time, he wasn't walking in to endure ridicule. He returned as a guest of honor, a rising star in the music world, a young man who didn't just survive adversity, he redefined it. As Marcus stepped onto the campus, he immediately felt the shift. Gone were the mocking eyes. Gone were the whispered insults. In their place stood silence and respect. The same students who once laughed at him now watched him in awe. No longer a joke, no longer the charity kid, no longer the singer's son. Marcus Calloway had become a name of his own, an artist, a leader, a symbol of resilience and triumph. He had shattered every label, every box, every doubt. He'd proven to them, and to himself, that where you come from doesn't define where you're going. That belief in yourself can carry you farther than anyone else ever imagined. As Marcus walked through the courtyard, memories came flooding back. He remembered the whispers, the taunts, the isolation, the pain. But none of it could touch him now, because every scar had become a stepping stone, every bitter laugh a chapter in the story he rewrote, and every setback a setup for something greater. He stood in the center of the campus, the same place that once felt cold, foreign, and hostile. Now it felt different. Now it felt like victory. Around him, students cheered, teachers applauded, not out of pity, not because of his last name, but because of who he had become. Marcus turned toward the crowd, offering a calm, confident smile. It wasn't about pride. It wasn't about ego. It was about peace. Peace with his past. Peace with his pain. Peace with the truth that he had earned every bit of this moment. He had won, not because of the applause, but because he had stood tall in the face of everything that tried to tear him down. Marcus was no longer just a star on stage. He was a symbol, a beacon for anyone who had ever been overlooked, pushed aside, or labeled. His story wasn't just about talent. It was about transformation, about proving that pain doesn't define you. What you do with it does. Marcus became the kind of person even his harshest critics had no choice but to admire. But more importantly, he became the kind of man who never needed anyone else's approval to shine. And in doing so, he reminded the world of one simple, powerful truth. You are not who they say you are. You are who you choose to become.